Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the new DX 24mm f1.7. This is the first DX prime for Z mount. We've obviously had DX zoom lenses in the past, and we've obviously had lots of full frame prime lenses, but this is the first DX prime lens. I know that a lot of people have been waiting for DX lenses, and it's good to start seeing them roll out. So the first prime is here, and it's a 24mm 1.7. In this video, we're going to talk about the lens, talk about its design, some of the external features. We're also going to compare it directly to two lenses that are very similar when it comes to focal length, which will be a 28mm 2.8, which is a full frame lens, and also the 26mm 2.8, which is also a full frame lens. So we're going to compare those lenses and hopefully try and give you a better understanding about which one of these lenses is going to be best for you. So when it comes to the lens's exterior design, it's built to be very small and very light. It is a compact prime, which makes sense for a DX lens to kind of go along with the current line of DX cameras that exists, things like ZFC, Z50 and Z30. So something that's nice, small and light makes sense. To keep that weight nice and low, there are no switches for manual focus or autofocus on the lens. You have to change that setting in the body. There is a customizable dial, so you technically have a function ring on this lens that you can customize, whether you want that to change ISO, aperture, exposure, and so on. Yes, because it is a lightweight, small lens, the mount is plastic. Again, I know that some of you don't mind that, and some of you don't like it. It is what it is. It's a plastic mount, so just something to be aware of. But I think that makes sense considering the weight of the lens is next to nothing. And then we also have a removable lens hood. So this lens hood is actually screwed into the filter thread. The lens hood is actually a really nice design. It was quite a nice shape, and I'm glad to say that this lens hood does come with the lens. So you do get this included with the lens. On some other lenses like the 28mm, you do not. So this is actually quite a nice lens hood. It screws into the filter thread on the front of the lens, but don't worry, the lens hood itself then has a filter thread on the front of it as well. So you can still use polarizing filters on the front of this lens if you want to. They either screw directly into the lens or they screw directly into the lens hood. It's entirely up to you which way you want that to be. Because the lens hood is screwed into the filter thread, it is not a reversible lens hood. But realistically, I quite like the design of the lens with the lens hood on, so I'd recommend that you screw the lens hood in and you leave it on, and there's no real reason for you to take that off, unless you need the lens to just be as small and as light as possible. In that instance, that's when you could do that. But for every other time when you're using the lens, I would leave this lens hood on for sure. This lens also has a really good closest focusing distance, so a closest focusing distance of 18 centimeters. That is closer than both the 28 2.8 and the 26mm 2.8 as well. So if you want a prime that gives you close focusing distance for DX, this is your only choice. But across the other board, this is technically the closest focusing distance prime in its category. When it comes to its size and weight, I'll put all three of their weights together. If you wanted the smallest lens possible, then that does narrowly go to the 26mm 2.8, that 26mm being a full frame lens, obviously, but it is still technically smaller. So if you wanted the smallest, it's the 26. In terms of deciding which one of these lenses is going to be best for you, we will obviously take a look at their image quality shortly, but just in terms of their focal length and in terms of their aperture, just a couple of things to be aware of. The 28mm 2.8 makes sense if you have a DX camera and a full frame camera, because it is a full frame lens. You'll be able to make use of the maximum resolution on the full frame camera that you have, whether that's a Z5, Z6, Z7, Z8 or Z9 for example. Whereas with the 24mm 1.7, yes, it's a faster lens, but it's a DX lens, which means you're only going to get maximum use out of this lens if using it on a DX camera like a ZFC, a Z50 or a Z30. So if you had one of those cameras, ZFC, Z50 and Z30, I would probably go as far as to say the 24mm 1.7 is clearly going to be the better choice because it is a DX specific lens. Or unless you wanted the smallest lens of the lot, you could then look at the 26mm 2.8, which is also a full frame lens. If you do want to use this lens on a full frame camera like a Z5, Z6, Z7, Z8 or Z9, that will affect the overall number of megapixels. You won't be able to use all of the megapixels in the camera because this lens will force the camera into a DX field of view. 45 drops down to around 20 and 24 drops down to around 10. It's also worth mentioning as well that if you wanted a lens that is better in low light situations, if you wanted a lens that allows you to shoot a shallower depth of field, a really nice blurry background, then obviously this 24mm 1.7 is going to really allow you to do that. The depth of field control of this lens is actually really nice. You have the ability to shoot all the way down to 1.7 and blur the background out and get a shallow depth of field. Even on a DX size sensor, it works quite nicely. That aperture will then go all the way up to f11, and you can shoot at f11 if you wanted to make sure that you had sharpness from front to back. You can't go any higher than that. And a lot of other lenses will let you go to f16, f22 for so on, but this lens is limited to f11, so it's a 1.7 to an aperture of f11. Just something to be aware of in case you were thinking of this lens for shooting at f22, for example. I don't know why you would do that, but just in case. So if you want a lens that is going to be good for low light situations to allow your camera to take more light in, and good for shallow depth of field, portraiture, street, travel, this is a lens I'd definitely consider, especially because of how light it is. One thing that's worth mentioning about the focusing, the lens does seem to focus really quickly. When I first focused it, I was surprised at how quickly it does focus. It is all internal focusing, so the lens itself does not extend. There's no barrel that moves in and out. The lens stays as it is when focusing. That is the same as the 28mm, but it is not the same as the 26. The 26mm will extend its central barrel when it's focusing. So just something to be aware of. Another difference between them, the 24mm is all internal focusing. There's no protruding elements or no change to the elements when focusing, which is always nice to see. And that also then means that it's easier to make the lens weather sealed. So this is a dust and drip resistant lens as well. It's mostly weather sealed around the front and around the back end of the functioning lens. So if you are planning on using this out and about in wet weather conditions, I would say that it will be able to take wet weather conditions, but it wouldn't be able to take extreme rain like some of the larger S-line lenses. There is quite a big size and weight difference when you compare this to the 24mm 1.8S. So the 24mm 1.8S is a full frame lens. It's a lot bigger, it's a lot heavier. The materials are different, so you've got metal in the barrel of the lens, you've got metal mounts, there's switches, there's dials. It's just a bit of a different design lens altogether. And then because you have the DX version of that, which is the DX24 1.7, it's a lot smaller and a lot lighter. It's just interesting to show that they are similar lenses, similar in terms of aperture, but because one is designed for DX and one is designed for full frame, you can really see the difference in size and weight between them. I suppose the biggest problem with this lens for me is I've never really been a fan of the 35mm focal length. And obviously this is equivalent to a 36mm focal length on a full frame camera. That's what the effective field of view will be. It is what it is. I can't obviously go and change the focal length of the lens, and I've been impressed with the quality of the lens, and I have enjoyed using it. Okay, so let's take a quick look at some of the comparisons that I've shot on this lens against the 28 2.8 and the 26 2.8, just to see if one of them stands out when it comes to image quality or depth of field control, and figure out which one might be best for you. We'll also take a look at focus breathing as well. First of all, we're going to start off with the 24mm at f1.7 on the left and the 24mm at f4 on the right. As you would expect, the lens sharpens up as you stop it down, which is a given. I don't think that it's overly soft when it's wide open at 1.7, but there is a noticeable difference between it being wide open and being stopped down at f4, which is fine. If we take a look at the 24mm 1.7 at 1.7 against the 28mm at f2.8, so both lenses are wide open here, they look very similar. I'm really torn to tell any difference or see any major difference between them. I think in terms of sharpness and contrast and color, they look almost identical, which would be fair considering that they're a similar price point, similar focal length, and the only key difference here is that one of them is a slightly different aperture at f1.7 versus f2.8. And obviously in this test, we're not looking for depth of field, we're just looking for sharpness and contrast, and they look very similar. With this example, this is where some of the differences start to shine through. So the 24mm 1.7 at 1.7 versus the 26mm at 2.8. Now, quite clearly, the 26mm, even though it's wide open, is still considerably sharper. And I would expect that, given its price point, the 26mm is almost what, double the price. The price difference between them, I would expect that you would see quite a bit more image quality, and we do see that here. We can see that the 26mm is the sharper lens when both lenses are wide open, 1.7 versus 2.8. Now, when we compare the lenses stopped down, so every lens here is at f4, so 24mm at f4, and the 28mm in this instance is also at f4. As I mentioned previously, when we stop that 24mm down, that sharpens up, but also the 28mm sharpens up as well. And again, I would now say that at f4, both of those lenses are equally as sharp. Really nice detail, good contrast and color. Just stopping them down doesn't show any one of them to be better than the other, which again would be to be expected, considering that they are a similar price point, similar style of lens. We then have the 24mm at f4 and the 26mm at f4. Now obviously when these lenses were wide open, the 26mm was sharper. Now that we've stopped both the lenses down, I am still struggling to see any major differences. I do think that the 26 is a hair sharper, like the tiniest amount sharper, and that's obviously me looking at my screen in front of me, and if you're looking at this on YouTube through compression and everything, I would probably say that they're going to look the same. So if you are planning on using these lenses stopped down, then there's no difference between the 24, 28 and 26. If you are planning on using the lenses wide open, then clearly the 26 is the sharper of the lenses. The 28 and the 24 are almost identical. However, the 24, when it's wide open, gives you that benefit of being able to get to f1.7, which none of the other lenses can do. That allows you to take more light in, use a lower ISO, shoot better in low light conditions, but also puts you in a situation where you can have a shallower depth of field. In this shot, we have the 24mm at f1.7, and then we also have the 26mm at f2.8. And you can see there's quite a significant difference in the level of depth of field. The background just is much smoother, way less distracting on the 24mm at f1.7. So if you were specifically after a lens that you wanted to use to shoot people with or street photography, and you just wanted a lot more separation from your subject in the background, then again, I would definitely be going for the 24mm f1.7, because as we can see here, the background is just a lot smoother, a lot more blurry compared to the 26mm, because the 26 has to be at f2.8. I hope that you found those quick tests and look at the image quality against these other lenses useful. I hope that you found this video looking at the 24mm 1.7 useful. It's great to see the DX primes now coming through. I've been a big user of the full frame, small, lightweight prime lenses for a long time now, and I have been using them mostly on my ZFC, so it's good to get native kind of DX lenses involved in that as well. And I'm not quite sure where this lens will sit in my set of lenses just yet, but I'll probably do an update video on my ZFC and the range of lenses I use with it, because it's probably the most used camera I have currently. I actually really like using the ZFC, and I would say that from a personal point of view, when I'm shooting for myself rather than shooting professionally, I'm using my ZFC more than any other camera, which is perfectly fine. Obviously, on the situations where I am using my camera professionally, I am still going to things like Z8s and Z9s. But when I'm using my own camera to shoot for myself, just on days out, stuff like that, I'm generally erring towards picking up the ZFC. So I am quite interested in putting a video together about why I like that so much and the lenses that I like to use with it. And I feel like this 24mm 1.7 is going to be a great choice for anybody that has a Z-mount DX camera. If you do have any questions about this lens, please do put them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.